The shocking truth about 25 Appalachian survival dinners. Before fast food chains and microwaves took over dinner, families in the Appalachian Mountains found comfort in simplicity. Their meals were crafted from whatever they had, humble ingredients turned into pure love and survival. Join us as we rediscover 25 forgotten hillbilly dinners that defined true American resilience. Corn pone. Before industrial sliced bread became the norm, corn pone was the crucial foundation, the daily staple for mountain families. This wasn't just food. This dish symbolizes sheer survival, especially from the late 1800s through the difficult years of the Great Depression. Corn pone proved a fundamental truth of the mountains, that with minimal ingredients one could still create substantial, necessary energy. The mountain women showed incredible ingenuity in its preparation. They mixed coarse cornmeal, a rougher, heartier grind than what most of us use today, with just water or sometimes rich buttermilk. To ensure caloric intake and flavor, they would add a pinch of salt and, crucially, a bit of bacon grease for necessary fat. This mixture was not dropped into a loaf pan. It was hand-formed into thick, flat, often oblong cakes. The cooking method was always flexible, depending entirely on what was available. Corn pone could be baked directly on large, hot stones near the fire, or it could be fried in a heavy cast-iron skillet over slow charcoal. Corn pone has a very distinct, almost rugged texture. The exterior forms a crisp, durable crust, while the inside remains dense and moist, giving a rough yet incredibly filling sensation. It is important to remember the cultural weight of this humble loaf. A mountain woman's reputation was often judged by the quality of her corn pone recipe, a testament to her ability to feed and sustain her family. But what truly made corn pone great was its shelf life. It could last for weeks without spoiling, making it an invaluable food source for long journeys, extended hunting trips, or harsh, isolated winters. Hominy. When you look at hominy, you are seeing pearl white corn, puffed up and notably more nutritious than regular dried corn. This isn't just cooked corn, it's a food transformed by ancient knowledge. Mountain residents learned how to make hominy from their Cherokee neighbors in the early 1800s. This essential technique was particularly popular in areas like eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. It became even more common during the Great Depression because it was incredibly nutritious, easy to store, and highly affordable, costing only about 15 cents or so. Its flavor is often described by those who remember it as a delightful and comforting blend, reminiscent of both savory dumplings and rich mashed potatoes. The preparation of hominy is a fantastic example of folk chemistry, a true marvel of ingenuity. It involves soaking dried corn in lye water. This lye solution wasn't bought. It was made directly from hardwood ashes, typically oak or hickory. The corn would soak in this corrosive solution for several days. The lye is crucial because it dissolves the corn kernel's hard, indigestible outer hull. After soaking, the corn must be repeatedly and meticulously rinsed to remove all traces of the lye. The result is dramatic. The corn kernels swell up, often doubling in size, becoming softer, whiter, and far easier to digest. This process, called nixtamalization, doesn't just improve texture. It releases vital nutrients, especially niacin, that regular dried corn lacks, preventing diseases like pellagra. Hominy could then be cooked into a thick porridge, deep-fried in lard or dried again for long-term storage through the winter. Southern beans and cornbread. The combination of beans and corn is more than a simple meal. It is the perfect nutritional formula that sustained generations of Appalachian folks. This meal holds the core value of providing complete nutrition with minimal expense. The magic happens when dried beans, most often pinto or navy beans, but sometimes dried red kidney beans for a hearty soup base, are combined with cornmeal. Together, they form a complete protein nutritionally equivalent to expensive meat. This was critically important for families who couldn't afford animal protein regularly. The historical importance of this dish runs so deep that an Idaho senator even passed a bill requiring the Senate restaurant to feature bean soup daily. Cooking these beans is an art that requires patience and deep know-how. Beans were soaked overnight to significantly shorten the cooking time, then slow-cooked for hours in a thick broth. To dramatically enhance the flavor and create a crucial richness, a piece of fatback or a ham hock was often added to the pot. The cooking process had to be carefully watched and controlled, using just enough water so the beans wouldn't burn or become too thin, simmering gently until they became wonderfully thick and creamy. The accompanying cornbread was always made fresh, often utilizing buttermilk and a touch of rendered bacon grease for an unmatched depth of flavor. It was traditionally baked in a piping hot cast iron skillet to achieve that perfect, crisp crust that contrasts beautifully with the creamy beans. Corn dodgers. If corn pone was the daily staple at home, then corn dodgers were the ultimate survival food, specifically designed to be carried along during long trips, intense field work, or, historically, war. The name of this dish holds deep, gritty historical significance. It was named by Civil War soldiers who literally ate them while they dodged bullets. The recipe for corn dodgers is brutally simple, reflecting the necessity of hard times. You only needed coarse cornmeal, water, and salt. Sometimes to boost flavor and caloric density for grueling physical labor, the cook would add a pinch of salt or a spoonful of lard. They were hand-formed into flat cakes and cooked quickly on hot stones or a skillet until a crisp, golden, and hard crust formed. The unique and crucial thing about corn dodgers is that they were not meant to be eaten immediately. Their purpose was to harden like biscuits of stone, allowing them to keep for weeks on end in a soldier's knapsack or a laborer's bag. When the soldier or laborer finally felt hunger gnaw at them, they had to chew the dodgers slowly, patiently allowing their natural saliva to soften the hard crust enough to swallow. This was a practical, rugged meal, utterly lacking in pretense, but it guaranteed necessary energy and survival under the harshest of circumstances. Fatback. In the Appalachian kitchen, before refrigeration became a reality, preserving fat was paramount, and fatback was the unsung hero. It was a source of pure, dense fat, preserved expertly by salting and held absolute value because, properly cured, it never spoiled. Fatback is distinct from the marbled bacon we know today. It is thick pieces of pure, pristine fat taken directly from the pig's back. For mountain families, fatback was a treasure, a concentrated fuel source. They relied on it daily not only to provide essential calories for sustained physical labor, but also to add the crucial, rich flavor needed for other survival foods that were often bland, like boiled beans or foraged wild greens. Fatback was typically sliced thinly and rendered slowly over low heat. This methodical process created two immensely valuable products. First were the crispy cracklings or scratchings, tiny savory pieces used to add a meaty, fatty flavor and texture to cornbread or used as a savory snack. Second, and equally important, was the pure, liquid-rendered lard. This lard became the universal cooking medium in the mountain kitchen, used to cook everything from boiled vegetables to frying chicken, and even forming the basis of many dessert pie crusts. If you could taste one of these resourceful survival foods right now, just one, which flavor would you choose? The rugged cornmeal crust of corn pone, or the smooth, creamy chemistry of hominy? Drop your thoughts below. Squirrel and dumplings. When winter dragged on relentlessly and the meat supplies from the autumn slaughter ran dangerously low, squirrel became an abundant, essential source of protein easily found in the woods. Hunting squirrel was much more than just foraging. In mountain culture, it was an important rite of passage for young mountain boys, teaching them patience, accuracy, survival skills, and the responsibility of providing. Simultaneously, preparing a rich squirrel stew was essential culinary knowledge for mountain women. This dish also shares a strong heritage and famous variation in the southern United States, often recognized as Brunswick stew. Preparation begins by cleaning the squirrel meat thoroughly, then quickly searing it in bacon grease to create a flavorful crust and lock in moisture. The meat is then slow simmered for hours with wild onions and any available garden or foraged herbs. The primary goal is to stew it until the meat is falling off the bone tender and infused with flavor. The absolute highlight of the dish is the simple, hearty dumplings, These are traditionally made from basic flour, salt, and water or milk. The dumplings are dropped directly into the rich, simmering broth, where they swell, softening and absorbing all the abundant, complex flavors of the meat and vegetables. Groundhog Stew. Groundhog Stew carries a profound, hopeful meaning. It symbolizes the end of winter and the beginning of a new life cycle, as groundhog meat was often the first source of fresh protein available after the harsh, lean winter months. Groundhogs or woodchucks were typically hunted around February, right after they woke up from their long hibernation. Thanks to the significant layer of fat accumulated during hibernation, groundhog meat is naturally quite tender and richly flavored. However, making the meat truly delicious and free of any gaminess requires careful preparation. The meat must be thoroughly cleaned, and crucially, it was often soaked in a saltwater brine for a period of time to effectively remove its strong, natural wild odor. Only after this essential step was the meat browned in lard before entering the long, slow simmering process. The groundhog was stewed with wild onions and any root vegetables reserved from winter storage, such as potatoes and carrots. What made this meal incredibly valuable was its yield. One single groundhog could remarkably feed a family of 6 for days. Possum and sweet potatoes. Today, mentioning a possum, might raise a few modern eyebrows, but in the past, in the context of mountain culture, this dish was considered a genuine fine Sunday dinner. The timing of the hunt was absolutely crucial. Possum was hunted in late autumn. The reason? During this season, possums grazed heavily on wild persimmons and acorns. This seasonal diet naturally imparted an unexpected, delicate, sweet flavor to the possum meat, completely transforming its quality and taste. After cleaning, the possum was carefully prepared and stuffed. The stuffing included sweet potatoes, wild onions, and sage. The entire possum was then slow roasted in a large, heavy Dutch oven, often buried directly in hot coals for slow, even heat. Throughout the long roasting process, the cook had to continuously baste the meat with the possum's own rendered grease, mixed with rich molasses, to keep it moist and create a beautiful, caramelized crust. The meal was perfect because the sweet potatoes absorbed the rich meat juices and fat, creating a unique and luxurious flavor combination. This specific meal was so culturally charged it was considered a challenge, forcing city folks to reconsider their assumptions about country cuisine. Turtle soup with cornbread. If you thought mountain cuisine was all basic fare, think again. Turtle soup was emphatically not a dish of desperation. On the contrary, it was regarded as a genuine delicacy. In the mountains, this slow-simmered soup could easily rival the most sophisticated and luxurious dishes served in high-end city hotels. Hunting snapping turtles was a serious job, requiring great courage, specific knowledge, and high survival skills. The cleaned and prepared turtle meat has a unique cross flavor, often described as lying somewhere delightfully between chicken and fish. Preparing this soup demands immense patience. It was slow-simmered for hours with wild onions, foraged herbs, and seasonal root vegetables. To increase the richness and nutritional density, hard-boiled eggs were sometimes sliced and added to the soup. A crucial final detail was the addition of a little vinegar. This acid was necessary to create a sharp tang, perfectly balancing the inherent richness and fattiness of the turtle meat. The turtle soup was cooked thick, rich in flavor, and meticulously reserved for only the most special occasions or to entertain honored guests, emphasizing its luxurious nature within the mountain context. It was typically served piping hot, always alongside fresh, warm cornbread. Wild greens mess. After a long, resource-depleted winter, the appearance of wild greens in spring was nothing short of a blessing. These foraged greens didn't just add variety, they were crucial for replenishing essential vitamins, most notably preventing mountain families from contracting scurvy, vitamin C deficiency. Foraging for wild greens was a serious and complex activity that demanded deep, specific knowledge of the native flora. A forager needed to clearly and correctly distinguish between the edible plants, such as dandelion greens, wild amaranth, or pokeweed, and those that could be harmful or even toxic. This skill was a vital survival component, often carefully passed down by mountain women through generations. Most wild greens, due to their natural protective compounds, possess a natural bitterness or potential toxins. Therefore, they had to be processed extensively. They were typically boiled at least twice before being fully cooked. This initial boiling leached out the bitterness and toxins. After boiling, the greens were finished by sautéing them with rendered bacon grease or fatback to add necessary caloric richness and flavor depth. Ramp dinner. Ramps, often called wild leeks, are a pungent type of bulb that grows in shady, cool mountain crevices. They are famous, or infamous, for their astonishingly strong, pungent onion garlic odor. This smell is so potent that it has been lovingly described as strong enough to clear a room. The consumption of a ramp dinner was considered an important community event, officially marking the definitive return of spring after the long, cold months. Mountain families often held massive ramp feasts to cook and consume large amounts of these wild leeks together. This served as a fantastic way to connect the community, share the joy of the first harvest, and reinforce social bonds. Ramps were usually prepared simply to retain their powerful, unique flavor. They were often fried quickly with eggs or bacon to complement the richness. Additionally, ramps could also be eaten raw alongside simple cornbread and beans. A truly amusing custom related to ramps is that children were often given the day off school the day after a ramp dinner because the smell of the leeks was so potent, it could literally affect the entire classroom environment. Which forgotten food demonstrates the most incredible Appalachian ingenuity? The toxic-removing chemistry of hominy? Or the shelf-stable durability of corn dodgers? Share your favorite piece of mountain wisdom. Fried catfish and hush puppies. Fried catfish and hush puppies were always the centerpiece of legendary vibrant fish fries, serving as a social occasion that united entire mountain communities, especially along rivers and lakes. The fresh catfish were caught directly from the local rivers and streams. Catfish is prized for its white, firm, and mildly sweet meat. To effectively remove the natural, muddy odor common to freshwater fish, the catfish were often traditionally soaked in buttermilk before cooking. The fish was then rolled meticulously through well-seasoned cornmeal before being plunged and deep-fried in hot lard. The result was the perfect contrast, a crisp, golden outer crust encasing tender, sweet meat. The indispensable side dish is the hush puppies. These are savory, slightly sweet-fried cornmeal fritters, often mixed with finely chopped onions to enhance the flavor. The famous legend surrounding the name hush puppies is charmingly simple. It suggests that cooks would throw these small fried cakes to barking dogs during the fish fry to tell them to quiet down, hush puppies, and wait for the scraps. Though possibly folklore, this dish is the perfect complement to fried catfish, with its slight sweetness and crunchy texture, creating a complete, satisfying community meal. Leather britches. This dish has a funny and slightly misleading name, but it represents a priceless preservation technique born of necessity. Leather britches are not clothing. They are fresh green beans that have been transformed into hard, dry strings, allowing them to be literally hung from rafters in a dry pantry throughout the winter. This traditional method helped preserve the delicate green beans without the need for expensive canning equipment, which was often unavailable, or the use of precious salt for brining. The origin of this effective technique is debated, but many believe that this unique preservation method may have originated with the Cherokee people, demonstrating important culinary cultural exchange within the region. Young, fresh beans were harvested and meticulously strung onto a thick thread, creating long, decorative chains. These strings of beans were then hung in a dry, airy place, such as an attic or a porch, to dry naturally for several weeks. This natural drying process caused the beans to become intensely tough and hard, truly like leather, hence the descriptive name leather britches. In the depths of winter, to revive the dried beans, they had to be soaked overnight in water. After soaking, they were slow cooked with fatback or salt pork until they became wonderfully tender, creating a robust, meaty flavored bean dish that provided warmth and nutrition. Pickled pig's feet and cornbread. When the annual hog butchering took place, mountain people strictly adhered to the powerful philosophy of waste not, want not. Every part of the animal was utilized, and among the byproducts, pig's feet were not seen as desperation food. They were considered a delicacy reserved for special guests. The pig's feet were thoroughly boiled, often for hours until the meat was fall-off-the-bone tender and the skin achieved the desired gelatinous texture. Next, a hot vinegar solution was prepared, heavily seasoned with aromatic bay leaves and whole peppercorns. The pig's feet were submerged in this hot, spiced vinegar and tightly packed into large crocks or jars for preservation. After weeks of pickling, the pig's feet became rich in flavor, fully permeated with the sharp, spicy tang of the vinegar and seasonings. Crucially, the remaining gelatin-rich broth, the natural aspic left in the jar, was highly prized. It was considered extremely nutritious, believed to be particularly beneficial for pregnant women and children. This dish was typically served cold, often alongside fresh cornbread, creating a perfect balance between the sour, spicy, rich flavor and the sweetness of the corn. Pork ribs with sauerkraut. This meal stands as an intriguing testament to the history of cultural blending within the mountains. German immigrants who settled parts of the Appalachian region brought with them the essential skill of making sauerkraut, fermented cabbage. This fermentation technique was an excellent form of preservation and perfectly complemented the abundant wild and domestic pork available. Homemade sauerkraut has a characteristic sour, tangy, and slightly savory flavor. This complex sourness created a perfect, mouth-watering balance when paired with the heavy richness of the pork. Wild pork ribs were cut into manageable bite-sized pieces and then slow-simmered together with the sauerkraut. This necessary cooking process lasted for hours, ensuring the meat became incredibly tender, truly melting in the mouth. Simultaneously, the sauerkraut absorbed the sweet, fatty meat flavor, mellowing its own tang. This combination resulted in a hearty, warming dish, perfectly suited for a satisfying winter dinner. Scrapple. Scrapple is arguably the ultimate expression of the no-waste philosophy, elevated to an art form. Originating in the Pennsylvania Dutch country in the 1600s, this dish was a brilliant, highly economical way to turn pork scraps that might otherwise be discarded into a valuable, protein-rich breakfast. Scrapple was created by meticulously utilizing nearly all pork scraps, organ meats, and bones left over after the primary butchering. These ingredients were simmered together until they were completely tender and the broth was rich. The meat was then separated, chopped finely or mashed, and mixed thoroughly with cornmeal and a blend of savory spices. This thick, savory mixture was poured into molds or loaf pans and left to cool overnight, solidifying into a dense block. When serving, scrapple was sliced thick and fried. It was crucial that it be fried until the outside formed a crisp, brown crust, creating a delightful textural contrast with the soft, creamy interior. Scrapple was often served for breakfast, typically accompanied by eggs and pancakes, creating a hearty, energy-filled meal designed to fuel a tough workday. Hoover Stew. The name alone speaks volumes. This dish carries a bitter, evocative name, assigned after President Herbert Hoover during the height of the economic collapse, subtly hinting at the desperation and scarcity faced by the American people. Hoover Stew was famous for two essential, necessary characteristics. It could stretch far enough to feed the whole family, and it was guaranteed not to break the tight monthly budget. This stew is a prime example of maximizing savings by relying on food scraps and leftovers. The ingredients were entirely flexible, usually including literally anything available to the cook. Commonly, people used diced root vegetables like potatoes, onions, turnips, cabbage, and even foraged wild dandelion greens. To enhance the flavor and provide necessary fat, a bit of lard or a discarded ham bone was added to the pot for slow simmering. The result was typically a thin, watery stew, humble and perhaps lacking in variety, but it fulfilled its core function. It successfully filled hungry bellies and provided a crucial psychological boost, lifting spirits during the darkest days of the Depression. If you could bring back one of these traditional Appalachian meals for modern family dinners, which one would it be and why? Mock apple pie. This was the greatest dessert invention during the economic crisis. A pie that successfully fooled everyone into believing they were eating real apples. It gained immense popularity during both the Great Depression and World War II, periods when fresh apples became expensive luxuries and were extremely scarce. The secret and astonishing ingredient that replaced the apples was the humble Ritz cracker. Ritz crackers were crushed into small pieces and layered carefully into the standard pie crust. To perfectly replicate the natural tartness of apples, a special syrup was created. This essential syrup was made simply from water, sugar, cream of tartar, and most importantly, lemon juice. This mixture effectively mimicked the natural acids and consistency of real apples. When baked, the Ritz crackers would absorb the syrup, swelling and softening, creating a texture and flavor almost identical to cooked apples. This amazing pie was so popular and widespread that its recipe was even famously printed on the back of the Ritz cracker box itself. Vinegar pie. Vinegar pie stands as proof that three of the most basic, cheapest ingredients, sugar, flour, and vinegar, can successfully create dessert magic. It spread rapidly from states like Pennsylvania and throughout the rural South in the early 1930s. Vinegar pie was born purely out of the necessity for cost-effectiveness. During the Great Depression, staple baking ingredients like eggs, butter, and especially fresh fruit were viewed as luxuries, completely out of reach for countless struggling families. The filling was made from a simple mixture of sugar, flour, and white vinegar mixed with water. The vinegar played a crucial, transformative role. It provided a sharp tartness, effectively substituting for lemon or other expensive fruit acids, creating a final baked filling that strongly resembled a thick, sweet custard. This dessert was often served with a towering meringue topping, which helped to mask the initial potent vinegar taste. Cornmeal mush. This highly economical breakfast became popular during periods when buying more expensive foods like bacon or eggs was simply beyond the reach of struggling families. Cornmeal mush is an incredibly healthy and filling dish, providing sustained energy. Cornmeal was cooked slowly with water or milk until it formed a very thick, dense porridge. Although simple in its base form, this dish could be upgraded and customized in many nourishing ways. It was often served generously with sweet maple syrup for a touch of luxury, or with thick, savory sausage gravy to add a rich, meaty flavor and protein. Despite being a saving grace and a staple during the economic crisis, cornmeal mush failed to maintain its popularity long-term. When economic conditions gradually stabilized and people could afford more familiar and expensive ingredients, this simple meal was often quickly forgotten, replaced by more traditional American breakfasts. Milk toast. Just as the name plainly suggests, milk toast is simply toasted bread, dipped quickly in warm milk, often topped with a small amount of melting butter and maybe a sprinkle of sugar. This unassuming meal was once one of the most popular breakfasts in the United States, especially cherished and served to those living below the poverty line or those recovering from illness. Milk toast is the literal epitome of simplicity and absolute economy. It is fundamentally a comfort meal. It is extremely quick, simple to prepare, and was the ideal non-demanding solution on days when the family couldn't afford complex dishes, or when only the most basic ingredients were left. This warm, easy-to-digest meal provided a soothing, gentle feeling for the consumer, making it beloved during difficult times. Creamed chipped beef on toast, S.O.S. Often known affectionately or perhaps less politely by the moniker shit on a shingle, S.O.S. This is another iconic, highly popular toast dish, especially well known in military barracks and among lower-income communities. S.O.S. utilizes chipped beef. This meat is heavily salted and sliced thin, and sometimes smoked to add a rich, preserved flavor profile. The beef is then combined with a thick, creamy white sauce, traditionally called a roux, made simply from butter, flour, and milk. It is important to note the two main variations of S.O.S. The classic version uses the dried, thinly sliced chipped beef. However, in military settings or for poorer families where costs needed to be cut, a simpler version made from ground beef was often substituted. This dish was widely loved as a comfort food because of its satisfying, filling nature and rich, creamy flavor. Victory Garden Soup. This distinctly patriotic soup emerged during World War II, a time when the powerful slogan, "Waste not, want not," was actively promoted as national policy. In a collective effort to encourage self-sufficiency and support the ongoing war effort, American families were strongly encouraged by the government to plant and maintain personal vegetable gardens, famously known as victory gardens. Victory garden soup is defined by its flexible nature. The recipe varied wildly, utilizing whatever vegetables the family successfully harvested from their personal garden. Common ingredients included locally grown tomatoes, carrots, corn, and potatoes. These vegetables were sautéed quickly with onions, then simmered with water or homemade stock. The soup was always seasoned with fresh herbs grown right there in the garden. This dish is a poignant symbol of the American spirit of self-reliance and the collective contribution to the country during a period of immense national difficulty. Burgoo. Burgoo is far more than a simple soup or stew. It is a profound concept, accurately described as liquid community. It is a gigantic, highly flexible stew that historically could feed hundreds of people from a single massive pot. It originated as the ultimate way to utilize whatever meat and vegetables were available, regardless of type. Burgoo was often the necessary centerpiece of large gatherings, including church events, political rallies, and major community celebrations. This dish intrinsically demanded cooperation from the entire community. It had to be slow-cooked for many hours over a deep wood fire, and someone needed to stir it rotationally, taking shifts to ensure the stew did not burn and stick to the bottom of the enormous cauldron. The foundation of burgoo is the meat, and it could genuinely contain any kind of meat: rabbit, squirrel, chicken, beef, pork, and even bear. This blend of meats was combined with seasonal vegetables such as corn, lima beans, tomatoes, and potatoes. Persimmon bread. Persimmon bread is a treasured, rich dessert, highly anticipated because it was only made when the wild persimmons ripened perfectly after the first hard frost of the season. This seasonal timing provided the perfect, sweet ending to the culinary year. Wild persimmons are significantly smaller and possess a much richer, more concentrated flavor profile than their cultivated counterparts. It is absolutely crucial to pick them when they are perfectly ripe. If picked even slightly early, they will be inevitably tart, or puckery. The ripe persimmon flesh is pressed through a sieve to form a thick puree. This flavorful puree is then combined with flour, sugar, eggs, and warm spices. The final result is a dense, wonderfully moist bread with a complex, fruity flavor. The natural sweetness and warm aroma of persimmon bread provided a deep, sweet comfort and a wonderful, festive conclusion to a hearty mountain dinner. 30 vintage cooking secrets from the 50s housewives. When the modern world became convenient and wasteful, we gradually forgot the kitchen wisdom that was once liquid gold in the family. Turning back to the 1950s, a time of scarce ingredients and tight budgets, the resourcefulness of housewives was the key to delicious, sufficient, and waste-free meals. From utilizing every scrap of leftovers to creating new dishes praised by husbands and children, today we explore the smart cooking hacks that subsequent generations have inadvertently forgotten. Mayonnaise for moist cakes. Remember the trick of using mayonnaise as a moisture booster for sweet cakes? Something that sounds strange on the surface, but is incredibly effective in reality. Housewives in the 1950s were constantly seeking ways to keep their baked goods tender and rich, without using up precious butter or eggs, which were expensive and sometimes rationed ingredients. Mayonnaise made from oil and eggs adds necessary fat and moisture without overpowering the cake's final flavor, which proved to be an effective hack. The truth is that when mayonnaise is added to chocolate or spice cakes, it even makes them better, delivering a richer flavor, a smoother texture, and more softness. You just mix a few spoons of mayonnaise straight into the batter. Suddenly, your homemade cake has a texture resembling something made at a high-end bakery. The moisture retention is so good that you can eat it without frosting and still find it delicious when enjoyed with coffee. This trick became a big hit at school bake sales, church potlucks, and family dinners. Mayonnaise was also a silent savior when ingredients were limited or rationed, because if you had mayonnaise in the fridge, you had the potential to bake. Crushing stale cake into crumbs for dessert. Crushing stale cake into crumbs was the ultimate act of salvage in a home that wasted nothing. When a cake became dry or sat too long on the counter, housewives didn't toss it in the trash. They broke it into pieces by hand or used a rolling pin to crush it into fine crumbs. Those cake crumbs had many uses. You could press them into a pie crust with butter and sugar, sprinkle them over pudding, or layer them into a trifle. Some people even use them as a topping for fried items or mix them into new batter. It was the sweet, fragile assurance that dessert was never too far away. The cake might have been old, but the love behind it wasn't. Housewives viewed these crumbs as building blocks, not garbage. An old dessert became the beginning of another. That was the magic of mid-century homemaking. You figured out how to keep the flavor alive, even in the smallest scraps. No one guessed the pie crust used to be a birthday cake, and that was the key. Stuffed apple bake, a practical and sweet dish, was also considered a warm dessert to finish the meal lightly. Do you remember any tricks your mother or grandmother used when the house ran out of eggs, butter, or milk? Share your family's ingredient substitution secrets in the comments. Quick refrigerator pickles. Refrigerator pickling was how housewives brought a little brightness into the meal without spending all day canning or using expensive equipment. You slice cucumbers, onions, or even green beans. Pour a hot mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices over them. Then seal the jar and chill it in the fridge. No need for boiling water baths or pressure canners. In a day or two, you would have sweet and tangy pickles, adding crunch and flavor to simple meals. They kept their crispness, looked colorful, and made a sandwich or roast meat feel more special. Best of all, it allowed you to control the flavor, adjusting the sweetness and seasoning it your way. Cold pickling felt homemade but also modern. It was quick enough for a weekday dinner, yet classic enough to impress guests. This trick kept housewives a step ahead, turning garden surplus or produce drawer scraps into little jars of joy. In a world of wasting nothing, pickling meant preservation, not just flavor. Every time you opened the fridge and smelled that pungent aroma, you felt like you had a small reward for doing things smartly. Broiler drawers. Broiler drawers were the toaster ovens of that era, except they were installed right under the oven. This was where housewives melted cheese, crisped breadcrumbs, or gave sandwiches that perfect golden top. It heated up fast and got very hot. If careful, you could slide a tray of garlic bread or a casserole in there and get a bubbly brown crust in just minutes. It was also used to toast slices of bread before pop-up toasters became common in every home. This drawer saved time and effort. It was right there, part of the cooking rhythm. You learned how to use it without burning your fingers, and once mastered, it became your best-kept secret. Housewives loved its flexibility. It didn't require extra counter space. These drawers were small, hot, and powerful, just like the women who used them. Ice trays for portioning and preservation. In the 1950s, ice cube trays weren't just for ice. Housewives used them to portion and store homemade broth, leftover sauce, or any little bit of soup that was too good to toss. Once frozen, those little cubes of flavor essence could be dropped into a pot weeks later to bring life back to stews, casseroles, or sautéed vegetables. Chicken broth from roast dinner, leftover beef drippings mixed with water were also frozen. This hack was both practical and smart. It kept meals from being bland and helped stretch flavor when seasonings were scarce. Plus, it was a way to avoid waste without relying on bulky storage containers or wasting refrigerator space. Ice cube trays were cheap, easy to clean, and always handy. You knew you were doing things right when the freezer held a few trays full of amber or golden stock. It made midweek cooking faster and tastier. Evaporated milk replaces heavy cream. In the 50s kitchen, evaporated milk was an essential hack, a reliable tool that kept the kitchen running smoothly. Heavy cream was expensive, spoiled quickly, and wasn't always easy to find at corner stores. Conversely, evaporated milk, stored in cans, could be kept for a long time and provided the richness housewives needed to whisk into sauces, soups, or desserts. They just needed to shake the can, open it, and pour it straight into the pot like a secret ingredient. It beautifully thickened dishes and delivered a silky, smooth texture that people usually only got at high-end restaurants or special dinners. It worked effectively in coffee, mashed potatoes, fudge, and even homemade ice cream, costing only a fraction of the price of heavy cream. Housewives trusted it, not because they were forced to use it, but because it really worked. If lucky enough to have 2 cans, you could even chill the can, then whip it up to make a topping for pie or pudding. It held its shape well and was used in mousses, icebox cakes, and pies. It sounds like a budget tip today, but back then it was just smart kitchen management. The pantry always had a few cans ready. In an era where smart ingredient substitution meant the difference between skipping dessert or having something sweet, evaporated milk played the role of a silent hero. It made thriftiness feel luxurious, and that meant more than anyone could imagine. It was an essential solution when heavy cream was hard to find. Stale bread into homemade croutons. Turning stale bread into homemade croutons was one of the simplest yet smartest tricks in the 1950s kitchen. Bread never kept long, especially before preservatives became common. But a good housewife would never let a loaf go to waste, as it was considered a sin in an economical kitchen. Instead, she would cut it into cubes, drizzle a little oil or bacon grease, mix with whatever spices were available, usually salt, pepper, or a pinch of garlic powder, and bake until crispy. These croutons were then stored in jars. They were added to soups, casseroles, or salads over the next few days. They brought crunch, warmth, and a sense of inventiveness to any meal. The aroma of crunchy toasted bread with a hint of garlic or butter was enough to bring the whole family into the kitchen. You didn't need to buy anything new. You just made the old new again. Kids loved them, husbands noticed them, and guests thought they were fancy, which was the funny truth since they were made from scraps. All from a slice of bread that might have been thrown away. It was a perfect example of 1950s household management. Clever, silent, and incredibly practical. Housewives learned how to turn a potential waste item into a winning side dish. Mixing salad dressing in an old ketchup bottle. Making salad dressing in a cleaned-out ketchup bottle sounds like an exaggeration, but for a 1950s housewife, it was second nature. Once the ketchup bottle was empty, she would wash it out with hot water. Then add oil, vinegar, mustard, salt, sugar, and any available herbs. After that, she would shake it up. No blender needed, no mess, just traditional elbow grease. That ketchup bottle became a reliable dressing shaker, ready whenever needed. It poured easily, stored well in the refrigerator, and cost nothing extra. You didn't need to buy fancy containers or mixers. You already had what you needed. It was ingenious, resourceful, and brought a strange satisfaction, like saving string in a jar or aluminum foil in a drawer. This hack stemmed from the spirit of wasting nothing, using everything. Housewives liked controlling their ingredients, especially with small children at the table, ensuring no artificial flavors, just what they made themselves. Today, we chase clean eating and minimizing waste trends, but back then, those ideas were simply about doing things smartly, sometimes turning trash into treasure with just one good shake. Leftover mashed potatoes into pancakes/patties. Leftover mashed potatoes turned into pancakes, or patties, was a breakfast staple in families who refused to waste even a spoonful. The process was simple. You took cold, firm mashed potatoes, added a little flour or egg, and dropped the mixture into a hot pan. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, it was a warm, filling, and extremely economical dish. 1950s housewives knew that potatoes were cheap, but not cheap enough to throw away. These pancakes helped extend a dish over multiple meals and added warmth to the morning. You could add chopped onions, garlic, or even leftover cheese crumbs fried in bacon grease or butter. They delivered an aroma that brought the kitchen to life. Overnight leftovers didn't mean boring, it meant cleverness. It meant knowing how to create something new from something that had already served its purpose. These potato patties didn't just fill hungry bellies, but also proved that a little imagination could go a very long way. Utilizing cereal bag wax paper liners. Reusing cereal bag liners as wax paper was a kitchen hack hiding in plain sight. When the kids finished the cornflakes or puffed rice, housewives would carefully remove the inner plastic wax paper liner, shake out the crumbs, and save it. This crinkly sheet of wax paper/plastic wasn't garbage. It was a versatile kitchen tool. You could wrap sandwiches, cover leftovers, line cake pans, or even roll out pie dough without sticking. It was durable, clean, and most importantly, completely free. In the 1950s, every penny saved counted, and this clever reuse felt like a quiet rebellion against waste. Housewives found dozens of ways to repurpose things others might throw away. It was a lesson in resourcefulness, not just economy. The sound of those liners being folded and tucked into a drawer was the sound of a house run properly. Storing celery in aluminum foil. Storing celery in aluminum foil was one of those little-known hacks that distinguished a wasteful kitchen from a wise one. Plastic wrap wasn't yet a common household item, and Tupperware was still a novelty for many families. So, when a bunch of celery started to soften or go astray, housewives would wrap it tightly in aluminum foil and store it in the refrigerator. This simple act worked magically. The foil allowed just enough moisture to escape while keeping the celery firm and crisp. No soggy stalks, no strange smells, no food tossed out. That foil wrap could keep a bunch of celery fresh for nearly 2 weeks. Kids still had their crunchy snack, and soup or casserole still had that satisfying crunch. It sounds small, but it meant less waste and more money saved over time. Potato boiling water for thickening gravy. Potato boiling water as a gravy base is one of those tricks that seems too simple to bother with until you taste it. When you boil potatoes, the water turns cloudy and thickens with starch. Most people pour it down the drain, but old-school cooks saved it. That cloudy water was liquid gold, perfect for thickening gravy, stews, or even making a quick roux without butter or flour. It added body and just a hint of subtle potato flavor, which paired beautifully with meat drippings or leftover vegetables. It was warm, filling, and somehow made everything else taste richer. You can stir in pan grease or a spoonful of mustard or vinegar and have something considered a real sauce. Unfussy but deeply satisfying. This hack barely appears in modern cookbooks. It was a silent skill, one you learned by watching, not by reading. If you could go back and try one of these old-as-new dishes, which one would you choose and why? Let us know. Using scissors to cut herbs and bacon. Using scissors to cut herbs and bacon is one of those simple hacks that makes perfect sense. Before food processors and fancy slicers, housewives relied on kitchen shears for small tasks. A quick snip of chives over salad, a slice of parsley into soup, or even dicing bacon into strips before putting it in the pan. Everything was faster with scissors. You worked directly over the dish with no cutting board to clean. Less mess, easier control. It gave a sense of precision and ease, especially when time was tight. The pair of scissors used to open packages or cut meat wrap was washed clean and put straight to use. This trick wasn't glamorous, but it saved minutes when every minute counted. Soda pop and cake mixes. Adding carbonated soda pop to cake batter sounds like a kid's prank, but for decades it was a real kitchen hack that actually worked. When families lacked eggs, butter, or milk due to restrictions or tight budgets, they found that a can of cola or lemon-lime soda not only added sweetness but also leavening to boxed cake mixes. The carbonation bubbles acted as a rising agent, giving the batter a lift and fluffiness that surprised even skeptical bakers. Lemon-lime soda was used for yellow cakes and cupcakes, while cola paired beautifully with chocolate. The result was a moist, light cake that didn't need buttercream to be delicious. Sometimes people even mixed flavored gelatin powder into the batter to boost color and match the soda, e.g. bright pink for strawberry soda, green for lime. It was part dessert, part science experiment, and always a hit at parties and school bake sales. Extending ground beef with oatmeal. Extending ground beef with rolled oats wasn't just about saving money, it was necessary. Meat was expensive and often rationed, but families still needed protein on the plate. Instead of using a full pound of ground meat for meatloaf or burgers, housewives would mix in rolled oats. The oats absorbed the flavor, added texture, and held the mixture together. You'd never guess there was less meat. And if you seasoned it well with onion, garlic, or even ketchup, it tasted like a full pound of beef. It was healthier, more nutritious, and cheaper. This trick helped feed more mouths without compromising quality. A similar hack was mixing peanut butter into meat patties. A couple of spoonfuls of peanut butter made the mixture stickier, added fat, and delivered a subtle, nutty flavor that some loved, often balanced with ketchup on top. These meatloaves were humble, hearty, and made with pride by housewives, proving cleverness in utilizing what was available. Dry mustard meat rubs. Dry mustard used as a meat rub wasn't just a way to add flavor, it was a silent method of preservation, long before refrigerators dominated every kitchen. A generous amount of dry mustard, often mixed with salt, pepper, and a few available spices, was deeply rubbed into cuts of pork, beef, or even game meat. This mixture helped dry the surface, seal in the juices, and provided a subtle tang that came alive when cooked. These rubs were especially effective when meat had to be kept cool in cellars or ice boxes and used over several days. For families who couldn't afford to waste anything, it was a small layer of safety and a lot of flavor. As the meat was rubbed and rested, the mustard acted as a protective barrier, especially in roasts. Today, we rarely think of spices as preservatives, but back then a tin of mustard powder was one of the most useful things in the pantry. Storing bacon grease. Storing bacon grease in a tin can was a ritual in every working kitchen, a sign that the home was well taken care of. It sat on the back of the stove, lid open, ready to catch every drop of golden fat left over from breakfast. Housewives wouldn't waste something that could be reused, especially something as richly flavored and versatile as bacon grease. It was their secret weapon for frying eggs, potatoes, making gravy, or adding a deeper flavor to soup. Just a small spoonful could make bland vegetables appealing. It was practically a seasoning all its own, delivering a smoky, salty, and savory taste. The grease solidified when cool and would keep for weeks without spoiling. They just trusted it. Bacon wasn't something eaten every day, but when it was, you had to make it count. Even the leftover drippings were precious. The bacon grease was strained to remove crumbs, chilled until firm, and used instead of expensive butter or shortening for biscuits, cornbread, and general frying. This was liquid gold in the kitchen, a survival tactic that stretched flavor across dozens of meals. Do you still keep a jar of bacon grease on the stove? Or what dish do you always make from leftovers? What does the memory of that warm kitchen smell like? Leave us a message. Cracker crumbs for coating. Cracker crumbs used as a meat coating was breadcrumbs before breadcrumbs existed. If a housewife ran out of store-bought breadcrumbs or never bought them in the first place, she turned to a box of crackers, often saltines, crushing them finely with a rolling pin or the bottom of a glass. The crackers became a crispy coating for chicken cutlets, pork chops, or even fried tomatoes. They adhered well, browned beautifully, and provided a salty crunch to anything tossed into the pan. You could season the crumbs or leave them plain depending on the dish. Saltines were cheap, kept long-term, and always available, which made them perfect for coating jobs. They were also a no-waste method, as old crackers were even better for this job. A similar hack was using crushed potato chips to top casseroles, creating a golden, salty, and unexpectedly satisfying crust. Stale bread was also dried, crumbled, and pan-toasted to make crispy toppings, yielding a warm, nutty flavor. Deodorizing the refrigerator with coffee grounds. Using coffee grounds to deodorize the refrigerator is one of those tricks that seems odd until it actually works. Before baking soda became the default solution, housewives would scoop used coffee grounds into a bowl and set it quietly on the fridge shelf. The coffee grounds absorbed odors without adding any strange smells of their own. It was silent, reliable, and utilized something already on hand. Housewives loved finding second lives for everyday items, and this was a win. If your fridge started smelling like onions or last Sunday's roast, the coffee grounds pulled the stink right out, and they did it naturally with no chemicals or fuss. It made opening the refrigerator door a little more pleasant, especially when guests were over. Back then, no one wanted their butter to taste like cabbage, and this little hack helped keep flavors clean and meals fresh. A similar tip was rebrewing old coffee, adding eggshells to the pot before boiling, where the shells helped settle the grounds and bitterness, creating a cleaner cup of coffee. Cabbage boiling water as soup base. Cabbage boiling water might not sound like much, but in the 1930s it was enough to get people through hard times. Boiling cabbage was already a regular routine, but families quickly learned never to pour the water down the drain. That cloudy, sulfur-smelling liquid contained nutrition, starch, and enough flavor to be turned into a soup base. Some would add a diced potato, a handful of onion skins, or a bit of stale bread to thicken it. Others might add salt if they had it and call it dinner. There was a sense of pride in creating something from what others considered nothing. While maybe not delicious, it was hot, filling, and warming on cold days. In some homes, that broth became the start of a stew that would stretch for days. You reused everything back then, especially things no one thought to keep. Similar is celery and onion soup, made by simmering scraps like celery tops, onion peels, and water for hours. Simmering bones for broth. Simmering bones for stock was an act of transformation, taking scraps and turning them into something nutritious and flavorful. A leftover chicken carcass, beef bones, pork ribs. Nothing was wasted. Housewives would put the bones in a pot with onion ends, carrot tops, and peppercorns. Then they let it simmer, low and slow, for hours. Hours later, they had a rich stock, ready to form the base for dozens of other meals. No cartons, no bouillon cubes, just the authentic flavor of what was left behind. The stock made soups deeper, sauces richer, and even made plain rice a little more special. Bones weren't trash. They were the start of something. Housewives understood that a good pot of stock meant tomorrow's dinner was half done. This wasn't just frugality, it was skill. Making stock was a quiet foundational work in the rhythm of home life, filling the house with warmth even before anyone ate. Utilizing butter wrappers. Keeping butter wrappers was one of the quietest and most clever habits in the 1950s kitchen. After a stick of butter was finished, a housewife would fold the wrapper neatly and store it in the refrigerator or freezer. When it was time to bake, she would pull it out and use the residual butter to grease cake pans, cookie sheets, or muffin tins. It provided just enough fat to keep everything from sticking. No mess, no waste, and no need to use extra butter. This small act was part of a larger mindset. Waste nothing, use everything. Even butter-soaked paper had a second life in homes where everything had value. The wrapper had a job to do, and it did it well. It was a tiny act of economy, yet it carried a big message about resourcefulness. Wrapping sandwiches with rolled wax paper. Wrapping sandwiches with rolled wax paper was the default method for packaging love into lunch. Plastic bags weren't always available, and aluminum foil was reserved for bigger things. So, housewives would roll sandwiches tightly in wax paper, sometimes securing them with twine or ribbon. This kept the bread fresh and the filling in place. When opened, the sandwich still looked crisp and not soggy. It was part presentation, part preservation. A school lunch wrapped this way looked neat and thoughtful. For working husbands and school children, that little joy meant something. Wax paper had a soft, almost comforting crinkle when unwrapped. It didn't sweat, didn't stick, and could be tucked back into the lunchbox. In the era before disposable plastic dominated the kitchen, this was the gold standard. Canned fruit cocktail for dessert. Canned fruit cocktail was the sweet secret at the end of many 1950s meals. When fresh fruit was hard to keep fresh and budgets were tight, those small cans of syrup were a godsend. Cherries, pears, peaches, grapes, all diced and ready to pour out. Housewives would layer the fruit with whipped cream, gelatin, or cottage cheese to create something that looked fancy and felt pleasant. It was easy, fast, and colorful. Kids loved it, husbands asked for seconds, and guests never complained. These desserts were made with minimal effort but much flair. A few spoonfuls added color to a monotonous dinner and comfort to tired families. These cans lined the pantry like a promise in a tin box. Whether topped with shredded coconut, marshmallows, or a scoop of ice cream, the cocktail did its job with the quiet reliability that defined 1950s homemaking. Stuffed apple bake was also used as a sweet and filling dessert, often served after soup or beans to end the meal lightly. Jell-O gelatin preserves leftovers. Using Jell-O to preserve leftovers might sound like a joke today, but in the 1950s it was a serious solution to a serious problem: food waste. Housewives would take leftover vegetables, meat scraps, or even diced eggs and set them in flavored or unflavored gelatin. The result was a molded salad that lasted longer and looked surprisingly elegant on the table. It wasn't about showing off, but about extending the meal to the next day and keeping it safe. The gelatin encased the food, slowing spoilage and giving the family an extra day or two to use it up. You would chill the mold, bring it out when guests arrived, and suddenly leftovers became a centerpiece. Some people cringe at ham and lemon gelatin, but others swore it was delicious. When choices were scarce, you used what worked. It was economical, resourceful, and strangely festive. That wobble meant something back then. It meant no waste, full bellies, and a little color on the table. Tomato aspic salad was also a variation of this hack, made by dissolving gelatin in hot tomato juice, mixing with chopped vegetables, and chilling, considered a creative way to extend vegetables into a formal side dish. Rolling pie dough with wax paper. Rolling pie dough with wax paper was a small, neat miracle in every baker's routine. The trick was simple. Place the dough between 2 sheets of wax paper. Then roll it flat without ever touching the counter. No flour flying everywhere, no sticking, no need to clean crumbs from every corner. It made the rolling faster and cleaner. Housewives found that the pie dough came out more evenly, less dry, and was easy to lift into the pan without tearing. The wax paper acted as a gentle cushion, keeping everything in place and making cleanup easy. In a kitchen where mess meant more work and time was precious, this trick was a quiet revolution. You didn't need a fancy mat or special tools. Another related tip for pie crust was chilling with cold water. When you bake a pie shell without filling, it tends to puff up or slide down. By quickly dipping the shell into a bowl of cold water right before baking, the sudden cold contracts the dough, making it hug the pan tighter and hold its shape, preventing blistering and cracking. Thanks for watching. If you love this nostalgic journey, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring other forgotten stories of history and food. We'll see you soon.